Welcome, everybody. Let's Build Daily. We got another special edition with Stuart Balcom today. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I am very excited for this topic.
Yes,
As you are.
me too. I'm your host, Chris Carolyn, and I feel like with this topic, this is one of those. There's so much nuance to kind of what's missing in the ecosystem right now and how it applies and in which areas and inside of HubSpot, outside of HubSpot. It's clear that everybody's feeling a lot of pain. And I'm just going to set the stage with a great post that you made last week. Share my screen here because it definitely resonated with me. I'm sure it resonated with a lot of other people, right? Um, I'm overwhelmed. There's no training here. It's like a fire hose of features. I don't know this is the best approach. There's no time to step back and be strategic. Now, uh, all things heard from HubSpot admins in the last month. So literally in the short amount of time that you have been, you know, starting your own thing over here, it didn't take you long to figure out, we've been seeing this happen for a while, but it's different when it happens in live conversations. So why don't you dig into that? Like, how quickly did this confirmation happen for you? And, how many times did you hear it?
Yeah, I mean it's a good question. And also so saying yes, absolutely hit all of these things in a month. One of the things that I always look for is like where are the repeating patterns, right? And it became pretty clear pretty quickly as I was talking to folks about the HubSpot ecosystem, what they're trying to do in HubSpot, coming from a app partner background for the last couple of years, have been in a very different vantage point on the ecosystem than many, sort of very different from solutions partners, certainly different from in-house HubSpot RevOps folks. I was not in a RevOps role, like I was in a growth role. So sort of working on the ecosystem rather than being directly in it in the same way that a lot of other folks in the ecosystem are, I think. So sort of brought some of that perspective. But the thing that I like I say always look for is what are the repeating patterns? And I was finding as soon as I would talk to somebody who was in-house at a company trying to solve a problem in HubSpot, two things became pretty clear. Like generally, or in many cases, HubSpot was not a thing that they really cared about. They just happened to be the person who cared about it the most at their company and was the closest to it. Often their title did not include HubSpot, did not include ops. HubSpot's just a tool that they're using to try to solve a business problem for themselves, for other folks on the team. And I think that challenge of being a little disconnected just sort of amplifies everything above here, everything at the top, right? It's like there's a lot going on in the HubSpot ecosystem, but there's also a lot going on in the rest of people's regular day to day. And I think that the thing that is especially true, and to be clear, like that is another post where I said this, like that is the vast majority of HubSpot users. There are 6,500, 7,000, 7,500, whatever it is, solutions partners. HubSpot has more than 215,000 customers, right? So the vast majority of folks using HubSpot every day are not as deep in it as solutions partners, are not dedicated HubSpot admins, are not, don't have aspirations to be a HubSpot expert, to go start their own HubSpot expert shop, right? So this gap between the reality day to day for that person and what's possible, the sort of void or the echo chamber to a certain degree of like what is everything is great about HubSpot over here is pretty vast. And I think that this feeling that I am just trying to solve a problem in the business and I just need a clear path right? I need a path that is, doesn't necessarily have to include the latest and greatest. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most complex, perfect thing. It just needs to work for my specific case. Um, and I want to, at the same time, I want to do it in a way that makes myself and makes the team feel more confident in how we're using HubSpot to solve general business problems, right? One thing that is not in here, which certainly could have been, is like what is the general sentiment? What is the general temperature at a company on the HubSpot that they have purchased, right? And I think generally it doesn't line up with, or generally there is an opportunity for it to more to better line up with what is possible, what that business could be getting out of HubSpot.
Yeah. And that's like, I think a polite way to say it, that there's opportunity. Uh, Real talk, like most people have a very hard time articulating what HubSpot is doing for their business. At best, and we created this problem in the ecosystem by selling it as a point solution. At best, they will say something like, "Oh, that's the place where we email stuff from," or "That's the place where the automated nurture sequences happen," right? Or that's where we, if you get lucky, that's where we have our customer data, right? Um, and like, to continue on your post here, like, none of us went to school, to be a HubSpot admin. And this is like against the backdrop of, again, this transition that's happening right now with all these features, all this big platform. There's so many origin stories for people who are in the ecosystem that came from HubSpot Academy, right? And back then, it was the go-to for resource. You could school yourself on what you were about to do with HubSpot, how it was going to help you. And that was before, on the I think it was like 13-year journey towards 100,000 customers. Now in the last 3 years is an additional 115,000 people in the ecosystem. None of them are using the academy. It's hard to even point people to the academy sometimes because it's such a, black and white, or like Commerce Hub stuff isn't there, or so you have to learn on the fly. And that's where, coaching can be a great resource, and it's a missing element. And before I, pass it back to you, I was debating on how to present this today. But just to like put it in perspective, I think it's important to know the resources that are available to you right now, which are not the right resources, right? So you have sales teams that are incentivized by quotas, that don't always have a full working knowledge of the product. You have a partner ecosystem that is incentivized to sell more HubSpot and build it and service it all themselves if they can. You have a customer success team who's been really great at, helping you do the things that you say you want to do, with the tool, the functional success of the tool. But there aren't a lot of people asking, like, should you do that? Should you do it at all? Should you do it in HubSpot? Most of the times we think the answer is yes, but that doesn't mean there's not 5 different ways to do it in HubSpot. And this is where a lot of those like which one of the 5 you do depends on your organization and how it's set up and who's engaged and stuff like this. And there's no way it's very hard for the current ecosystem, including HubSpot itself, to support that directly without, this coach role in play that we're talking about to really kind of connect the strategy with the functionality of HubSpot.
Yeah, I think it's certainly an interesting challenge because of the sort of like you said, the changes in the HubSpot product, or the changes in the breadth of the HubSpot product, now mean that for the many things, the answer is yes, we can do it. But that question of how should we do it? Should we do it? What is the best implementation of this for our specific business case? Which ultimately was what this all comes back to, right? Like, people are trying to solve problems. It's a good comment on this, but like, everybody's trying to solve problems. Every tool is just a hammer. Like, you got to pick the right one to solve your specific problem, because the thing that you actually want is what happens once you've built it, adopted it, and you start seeing the return, the impact, and the outcome for the business. I think the thing that is challenging is that because there are so many different ways, so many, like, it's a very hard problem for the ecosystem to support broadly, because, and I think HubSpot is doing a good job of, at least, of trying to focus and direct on how do you niche, how do you verticalize, how do you get specific in um, the problem that you solve as a, somebody in the ecosystem, because at least then you know what the all the 5 ways are. Like, it's one thing to know these are the 5 ways that you could solve this problem for this vertical, but if you also say that you solve problems for 10 verticals, that's 50 different, like, variations to solve. There's all sorts of permutations of this, and I think that the challenge is sort of on multiple levels, right? It's both the strategic element of, like, should you go do this, but also what is the correct implementation or the right implementation for this use case, given what you already have. And I think that there is an interesting opportunity where those are two different things that are incentivized differently, um, or engaged with differently, rather than everything being sort of bucketed under one model.
Yeah. And I think, like, in the simplest fashion, what we're seeing is there's a lot of people out there that don't need to buy more HubSpot. They have built enough aptitude where they can build stuff themselves. They can maintain things themselves. So right there, the entirety of the ecosystem's incentive structure is out, right? Like, if they're not buying more, if they don't need us to build stuff for them, and we are, our incentives aren't aligned as an ecosystem to help those people. Yet the math, like you already said, just doesn't work. Over 215,000 customers, 7,500 partners, uh, thousands at HubSpot, right? That's not even close to where we need to be. And when people just need help as HubSpot, because I'm a firm believer that HubSpot is the right tool for most of these businesses. It's a platform like no other. I think they've been able to differentiate at the pace of product that they've been able to develop over the last year and a half. So, like, first things first, if you bought HubSpot whenever for a point solution like emailing or sales sequences or, even sales CRM, before you even, you'll know that you might want a coach when you take a step back and just think for a few minutes. And there's resources that we could provide to say, these are all the ways that HubSpot can be helping the business. And then it's super key. And the thing that I like to focus on as a coach, like, usually this person who has HubSpot as like an additional hat, right? They're not in charge of most of those decisions about how HubSpot gets used for the organization. So then it's a conversation of, okay, how do we present this, to your leadership team, to the sales leader, to the service leader, in a way that, hey, like, we're already paying for this thing. We already have access to these things. It shouldn't be a lot of cost. Might be some effort, but we are doing ourselves a disservice if we don't, leverage this tool that we're paying for, right?
I think that that's a key point. That's certainly a conversation that's happening more and more, given the sort of economic climate and the, companies being conscious of their spending broadly, especially on a sprawling tech stack that they have to maintain and integrate and keep up to date and build, institutional knowledge around. I think the idea that you can do more in the tools that you're already paying for, you can bring more of your data, more of your teams into the same place, and this is the narrative that HubSpot's been talking about for the last 2.5 years with the customer platform. It certainly resonates, but to do that, you need that sort of strategic, almost like approach to building product, right? Like HubSpot is a product, both from a it's a software product that you go buy, but it's a product to think about feature development against, make trade-offs in what you invest in versus what you don't, um, like making sure that you're driving adoption of the product. It's the same as uh, your own product. Like people buy your product, and then you need to get them to use or receive value from that product. And I think HubSpot is no different. And I think that the gap is in, to your point, like the gap is there's certainly some implementation gap in the sense that folks have limited bandwidth internally, that there's some specific which button do I click to do this thing uh, type knowledge gap for sure. I think those things are relatively easily solved in the sense that we're going to see AI stuff take on more of that, in terms of making the interface easier to interact with without understanding all the nuances of the interface. But we're still going to be left with the strategic question of, well, what is the right approach to this problem? What are the things that HubSpot can do versus can't do if we take this approach? And I think that's certainly where there's this opportunity to be a better sort of translation layer between business use case and implementation.
Yeah, I think that translation layer is a perfect way to say it. And so you're not just talking about it, you're trying to do your part, with maybe one of the most affordable support plans I've ever seen.
We'll see how long it stays this way.
What's that?
We'll see how long it stays this way.
Right. But I think that's our challenge right now, because this is an unknown quantity. Like, what the hell does coach mean? And maybe we should, before we dig into that, let's just explain this first, and then we'll dive into maybe the differences between coach, consultant, implementer, things like that. But so you launched, the next level of connected DTM, really with the focus on supporting these in-house, admins. And like, not everybody wants to work with a big agency, right? In fact, a lot of people don't. There's a lot of baggage there, not just from the HubSpot ecosystem, but you hear the word agency, you hear higher costs, more time to get things done, more meetings, longer schedules. And that's where these coaches, like you say here, it's like there's so much noise, right? Since we're in it every day. We can definitely cut through it in a way that's like, hey, there's been 100 updates, the last month. You should care about these two, right? And now you don't have to read through all 100, and get fear of missing out in the process and completely distract from what you're trying to accomplish, and then realize you need to upgrade to enterprise to even do it in the first place, right? So looking around the corner, even running around the corner to see what's there for you, and then coming back and saying, oh yeah, this is a good turn to take, or don't even go down that alley, like not worth it. So you've got some weekly live private office hours, unlimited asynchronous questions. I might want to dig into that with you. This library of resources, and this is where anybody who's citing this problem is usually also citing a lack of resources from the mothership, in terms of, as they've expanded so quickly, the academy doesn't cover quite enough anymore. There's more use cases, just more applied versions of HubSpot that aren't represented, like on the community forums or anywhere like that.
I think
right?
That's the way that I would frame that, is that it's the applied use cases. This is the thing that HubSpot can functionally do. This is the way that you can deploy that in a way that is, solves for the business problem, addresses the business case. And I think that that is a really tough spot for a like it is. I mean, we did this at Arrows, right, to a large degree for customer success use cases. It is a big lift for a platform like HubSpot to do across all customer types, all product features, all combinations of product features, which we talked about last time with automating workflow association labels in workflows. That combination of features is where you really unlock better use case matches. Um, so it's not entirely unexpected that.
Yeah. And to be clear, I think like I agree, like we should not even expect anything close to it. And that's where I think like some of us are working on like how do we align, we've got all these people making, their own product update posts, their own videos. Like we need more understanding about like how these things work in the wild, like applied. While HubSpot continues to do the Kyle Jepsen thing and say, hey, here's what it is, here's what it does. Like then I don't have to explain that part as a partner, like how invoices work. If you got a 3-minute video about how they work, that's great. Now I can say, this is how it can work for you in your business. So sounds like that's the focus of, the resources that you're providing here. How's the response been to this new coaching offering?
Yeah, it's been good. I think that it's an interesting sort of sweet spot or an interesting spot between, I'm going to do this sort of entirely DIY and find my own resources, dig through everything, implement everything myself. And I think a lot of folks that, that's the starting point. Like, maybe try that and run into a bottleneck or run into something that you're like, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm hitting the sort of extent of the time that I can spend on this, the level that I want to, I'm interested in getting to with this. But I think the biggest question has been around implementation. It's like, okay, great. So we're going to spend some time, shortcut some answers to, specific things they can work on, specific things they can implement. But what about actually doing it? And I think that's the thing that I'm very interested to see how this develops. And this has been language that's certainly been used directly when I've spoken to folks. Is like, at what point is that private office hours more of a private working session? I'm certainly, from my perspective, not trying to go build an agency, not trying to hire, a team of implementers to go run on the back end of this, right? Like my entry point is through, and it's sort of referenced for context. Connected GTM is a sort of content play essentially. So connectedgtm.substack.com is step-by-step playbooks, use case playbooks, essentially what we've just been talking about, but is content only. And then this is the level sort of beyond that is, okay, well, how do we take these playbooks and apply them to your specific situation? So I think that there is certainly going to be, it's going to be an interesting learning, I think, is like, well, what are those calls, the live time that we're spending together? How do I best enable admins to, not need hours and hours of implementation to get stuff done in their account? Like, how much can we, realistically, you can do a lot if you know what the thing is that you're trying to do in HubSpot in a relatively short amount of time, especially if you're able to, copy this template over here, if you're able to, upload this thing in your account, if you're able to, if it's, custom code actions is the obvious one, I guess, and maybe just because it's very scalable, but obviously an enterprise or at least an ops hub thing. But well, if you already have it, you just copy paste it in, it works, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are the sort of all the shortcuts that can be built into this that make the time that we're spending more strategic, more, proactively identifying like what is the thing that we should be solving for, and then asynchronously we can actually go solve that problem. Because I think the thing that is interesting, and one thing that I talked about with some other folks in the ecosystem was like, well, this could be do you run multiple live workshops a week? on different topics each time is, it's a lot of, feels like a lot of value because it's a lot of time, right? And after thinking about it, I was like, well, I don't really want to do that. Like that's a lot of time committed to at dedicated, uh, specific time slots with prep and like all this stuff. But on the other side, it's like, what in-house admins have time for multiple hours of calls where they're not doing anything in their account in a week, right? Like
Right.
maybe an admin has 3 or 4 hours a week set aside for HubSpot baseline amongst the other activities that
That's
they
scary.
have to do. So like
But
that,
true.
spending that. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true if your title is not HubSpot admin.
Right.
And I think it's very common that your title could be sales coordinator, marketing manager, it could be any other number of things. And HubSpot is just the tool that you're using to, it's sort of the delivery mechanism rather than actually the work that you're doing, right? Like if you think about an email campaign, like you want to set up a nurture campaign, the vast majority of that work is not in HubSpot. The vast majority of that work should be honestly writing email, figuring out who you're targeting, who you're, like what is the positioning and narrative around this campaign? What is the offer in this campaign? Rather than the sort of quote unquote implementation details of, well, we're going to automate it this way with a workflow with these templates in HubSpot. But the challenge, I think this is where the coaching angle becomes powerful, is that relatively simple implementation for this individual campaign becomes much, much easier if you're paying attention to data hygiene and, organization of data structure in your account, how you're managing how people end up in a particular stage or a particular status in your account.
Yeah. And there's just so much nuance. And, unfortunately, Salesforce and Oracle have left us with this baggage laden, world of, there's two sides, I think, to what is easy to take for granted in the HubSpot ecosystem because HubSpot just works differently. On the one side, they're used to, every question that I ask is going to cost me money, right? Anytime I ask for help, there's a huge bill behind it. And just understanding that going in, and I think is a challenge right now, to say like, no, like you have help available. It's pretty hard to find right now. That's why we're doing what we're doing right now. But it's there and it can be molded into whatever you want it to be, right? That's the key is trying to find that sweet spot. And it is going to be different for every organization based on what their responsibilities are, based on who's focused on it. But number two, when I see like unlimited async questions, and then, earlier this week, you get the question. This is where it's like starts to get into between coach, consultant, implementer, just fractional admin, right? When somebody asks, hey, can you add this pipeline, right? Can we add this option to a dropdown? So a lot of times it's not that they can't do it or don't want to do it, right? In these other systems, it would have been like they were forced to ask somebody else to do it. They don't even know that they can do some of these things. And the coach is like, hey, I'm going to answer this one time for you and show you how to do it. And then we agree that you'll be able to do this, on your own in the future. Because for me, that's the magic of HubSpot, in that you can build out a system that can be maintained internally. And we can fit this into however much time you have per week. But every little win like that, now you don't have to go to the Slack. You don't have to go to the email. We don't have to have a call about it. It just adds up so quickly. And it's those two things, though, are like a baggage left behind by these other ecosystems that are focused on managed services contracts, at all costs, or we got to have a whole admin team. When you hear the word HubSpot admin, it means something very, very different from Salesforce admin, right? And these are all kind of challenges, at least like little landmines, at worst, when you're moving through some of these conversations. And this is the kind of stuff, honestly, I'll just be blunt, like as soon as somebody who's driven by, like, let's say a quota or sales points starts to sniff out some of those challenges, it's very easy for them to be like, okay, this is going to be a lot of work and it doesn't make sense for us to target it in our pipeline right now. So we're not going to deal with it. And I get that. Like, if you're trying to run businesses and you try to, optimize your sales process and focus on the high percentage wins, and your team is not equipped to have those conversations, you really shouldn't. You're doing a disservice if you try to sell them, something they don't need at that point. And that's where I know for sure that there's a play for coaches here. And Mark Hans, helped me with an analogy, like, this is like high school and college tutor stuff that is just a layer that is starting to pop up, with offerings like yours, but it's still very hard to find, that kind of help right now in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be interesting how it develops. I think the sort of framework for me thinking through this from how is this most valuable to the businesses that I work with? How is it most enjoyable for me to go work on? Is a thing that I like, actively consider. Is like, how do you make it for anything that essentially any question that comes up? How do you make it evergreen? Right? Like, how do you make it the answer to that question, a compounding value add for that business? And I think that's where content is. And content is a very broad term, right? But I mentioned that the sort of entry point at the lower, or the starting point is, content only, and sort of abstracted content, I guess, is like the way that I would think about it. It's like, well, yes, it's like very use case specific, like you showed the screenshot, of the latest editions. Like, here's how to implement categorization of self-attribution, self-reported attribution in HubSpot, for example. All of these, everything that I'm sharing here is like very use case specific, but it's a use case in the abstract. It is maybe doesn't include the nuance for your specific business. And we talked about the 5 ways to do anything. Like, the version that you pick for your business is going to be different. Like funnel, lifecycle marketing and funnel, that one, like signal-based lead prioritization, absolutely going to be different for every business, right? And I think that is where coaching, and I think done well and done effectively, can be really great. Is like, well, how do you use that time, that additional relationship, or the deeper relationship that we have, to make the content, the enablement, the use case resource specific to you, so that it is not just better solving your problem today, but it also means that when you have new team members join, when you have, you need to go update that use case or add something to that use case, you have a starting point. You have an enablement resource that you're working from, versus, oh, we paid this consultant or this agency one time and they implement it. We don't really understand how it works. And I think, frankly, that's definitely something that companies are feeling, is that the HubSpot account is a black box, and they actually don't really know even if it's working, don't really know how it's working. So making any changes or onboarding new people to it is a challenge. And to your point, it often leads to, well, we've just got to go back to an agency to get that support.
Yeah. Or we choose a different system, right? Or we try to, like, maybe there's another system in play, like an ERP, where we are getting better support. We see that it has a CRM. Okay, we're just going to, take the plunge, and we're going to get rid of HubSpot and just try to start doing everything, in the ERP. And that's where, as we talk about, like, and there has to be a specific appetite and kind of avenue to talk about this, but really it comes down to, like, how are they valuing HubSpot, inside of their organization? And if it is a nice to have, which is like all the things that we're describing right now are in situations where it's very much treated as a nice to have. Like, I would hope so. Like, if you don't know what it's doing for your business, like, clearly for some people at the top, it is a nice to have, if they even know it exists at all. But these other systems like ERP or accounting systems, right? They are required to do business, right? So they automatically get attention, get resources without the struggle that we see on the HubSpot side. So once you understand kind of like that level of what is the state of HubSpot, in this organization, and that can be like our biggest add to the conversation, with these accidental admins, is just helping them think through that, right? To begin with. Because it's easy to just kind of line it up and say, oh, just I have to do way too much. Anytime I ask for resources, it just gets knocked down, right? That's often like, hey, we need to deal with some stuff there before we can even, the last thing we want to do is, we could build a workflow, no problem. But then if you don't have time to maintain it or like figure out what happens when it breaks, then you just turn it off and, we're losing money by the minute at that point. But you're still invested in the system, right? So how do we connect those dots?
I think that's ultimately the goal here, right? Is better connect the dots between the investment that you're making and the tangible impact for the business, right? It's sort of see it show up in multiple places, but certainly in the sentiment towards the tool from teams. But more importantly, like, it should be having an impact. There should be ROI in the investment that you're making, in the impacts on efficiency, on visibility, on team effectiveness, to hit the business goals that they're trying to reach.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, putting this together, taking this approach to try and, literally it's like you've done this before, where you listen to the market and then build the product that you think you're hearing the market needs and will help solve the problem. So I think you're setting, a fabulous example for anybody else who might call themselves a coach. And, I know we're both interested in feedback related to like, what's the right amount of resources, right? We hear both like at the same time. We hear not enough resources and we hear I'm overwhelmed with resources. What's the right cost? How many times? And this is something I learned early on. It's like some people are okay to meet once a month and then do everything asynchronously. Me, myself, as an ADHD, I don't mind if we can do like a 10 to 15 minute session, a couple times a week, if we know it's going to be there and we know that we're going to answer a question, in that session that, that works better for other people. So, well, we have to try and, package and write copy and like market it, one way, which I think is the overlying challenge of all this. It's like, we know you need help. We know that we can help you. We're here to understand, what that looks like for you. And, hopefully this coaching mindset, this coaching, how it's being defined here, can help us, get you the help that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Would certainly love to chat with folks who, whether coaching feels like it's an option for you today or not. Certainly, the feedback on like what is working, what isn't working, is super super valuable. Making sure that this is actually aligned with, and this is not going to be for everybody. Let's be clear about that. Like this is one option in the ecosystem, and making sure that it's the right option for your business is ultimately the goal.
Yeah. Well said. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this in the future. It sounds like you're getting some good feedback, and I'm glad to see you getting off the ground quickly, with Connected ETM. And for everybody watching, we challenge you, just try and take a step back, understand what HubSpot can do for your business. Think about coaching and what we've talked about here. Find the opportunity and let's grow. Thanks so much, Stuart.